At the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire paid the ultimate price for choosing the wrong side. The winners, Britain and France, marched in and began to carve it up. Then an army arose out of nowhere, expelled the invaders from its homeland, and proclaimed the Republic of Turkey. All because of one man, Mustafa Kemal, or as he came to be known, Ataturk, father of the Turks. Enormously ambitious for himself and his people, Ataturk saw independence as just the beginning. He would not only transform the government, but also how people dressed, worshipped, wrote, and named themselves, individually and as a nation.
There have been a number of metaphors that people use for Ataturk's impact on Turkish society. They say it was like an atom bomb, like a flood, like an earthquake. None of these really captures the sweep with which he changed Turkish society and the amazing ambition that he had.
This is the first country with a majority of Muslim population called a secular regime. He said that, okay, this is going to be the principle, this is going to be our future, and our future is going to be a democratic and secular state, and he did that.
Ataturk was committed to the idea of a republic. He wanted the people to govern. Yet, in many ways, he was an elitist. He believed that the elite had to transform the society for the good of the people. The slogan of his political party was "For the people, despite the people."
Young Mustafa was born on the edge of a dying Islamic empire, which was fading almost before his eyes. In the 1600s, the vast Ottoman Empire, with its diverse populations of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, was feared and envied throughout the world. But by Mustafa Kemal's childhood in the late 1800s, it had lost almost half its lands to rival empires and to Christian nationalists in the Balkans. With each new defeat, more poor, uneducated Muslim refugees arrived in Anatolia, the Ottoman heartland. Neighboring states began to call the Ottoman Empire the sick man of Europe.
Ataturk was coming of age at a time when Muslims were just starting to ask each other, what happened? When we last looked around the world, the Europeans were living in caves and covering themselves with animal skins. And we had telescopes, and we were studying mathematics, and we were writing sophisticated poetry. And then we concentrated on our own affairs for a few centuries, and now we look around the world and we're behind.
One reform group after another arose. Confident that he was destined for greatness, young Mustafa headed to the most reform-minded, prestigious institution in the empire, the army, whose military schools offered a superior education. There, he soaked up the writings of the great French philosophers.
And these were very dangerous books because they were talking about freedom. In contrast to that, in the Ottoman Empire, people were raised by the Quran. The Quran was a holy thing. You could not criticize it. You could not interpret it. You could not ask questions about that. So therefore, they thought Islam was part of the problem.
The more Mustafa Kemal compared East and West, the more he questioned the direction his government was going. And he wasn't alone. In 1908, one reform group, called the Committee for Union and Progress, seized control of the government and made the Sultan, the traditional ruler, a figurehead. The world would know these reformers as the Young Turks.
The main goal of the Young Turks was to save the empire. So they were seen now, looking back, as these daring revolutionaries, but they were also very much wedded to the status quo. It was very hard for them, actually, to think beyond the limits of the empire.
Kemal joined the Young Turks, but never penetrated their inner circle. He was critical when they entered World War I on Germany's side, hoping to restore lost territory and prestige, and more critical when they began to issue disastrous orders. Their abilities would never match their ambitions, but Mustafa Kemal's would. The world first found that out in a region called the Dardanelles on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The Dardanelles Straits connected the Mediterranean to the Black Sea and Western Europe to Eastern Europe and Russia. Whoever controlled it was likely to win the war.
The First Lord of the Admiralty, sitting in London, Winston Churchill, is looking at the map and realizing, we need to control these straits. Now, Turks had been considered in Europe for a century by this point to be kind of a wasted race, a tired race, a declining race. And there wasn't much doubt in the mind of Churchill or the minds of his aides that this was a battle they could win.
On April 25, 1915, 500,000 British, Australian, and New Zealand troops landed at Gallipoli, one of the largest amphibious assaults ever. As they advanced, Ottoman troops ran out of ammunition and fell back in disarray. Mustafa Kemal, only a lieutenant colonel, single-handedly stopped the Ottoman retreat. If they had no bullets, they still had bayonets. "I don't order you to attack," he said. "I order you to die."
To the shock of the whole world, and certainly to the shock of Winston Churchill, the Turks managed with tremendous tenacity not only to hold that peninsula, but ultimately to expel all the Allied troops.
Mustafa Kemal's triumph at Gallipoli would make everything he did afterward possible. But his road ahead was complicated by a horrific campaign launched by the Young Turk government, which left an indelible mark on world opinion. At the same time Kemal was battling British and Allied troops on the empire's western edge, the government turned its wrath on its own subjects in the east, Armenians.
The Armenians, who were a major ethnic community, a minority, a Christian minority in Eastern Anatolia, wanted to have independence. The Turkish reaction to that was really no tolerance at all. With no tolerance at all, they decided to deport the Armenian communities, and deportations turned into a major massacre.
Between 800,000 and 1 million Armenians, maybe more, died. Many were deliberately slaughtered. Many starved or froze to death. The Ottoman Empire's legendary ethnic and religious tolerance died alongside the Armenians. But its historic military prowess also faded with the loss of key provinces to Britain. Kemal wrote one scathing critique after another. Eventually, he resigned in disgust. When World War I ended in total defeat for the Ottomans, the agreement that followed, called the Treaty of Sèvres, confirmed Kemal's worst fears.
The punishment that was administered to Turkey was the most severe. The Turkish homeland, what we now call Turkey, was to be cut up and divided among the victorious Allied powers. There would be provisions made for a possible future Armenian state, a future Kurdish state, and the Turks would be left with a small mountainous area around Ankara in the center and more or less the most inhospitable part of the whole Anatolian region.
When the Young Turk leaders fled abroad, the Sultan bowed to his new masters, Britain and France. He ordered his imperial army disbanded and sent Mustafa Kemal to the hinterlands of Anatolia to supervise. Instead, Kemal, as he'd done at Gallipoli, seized the opportunity to do what he thought was right. He rallied the troops and began training them for a war of independence. When the Sultan found out, he sentenced Kemal to death. Kemal's response was to set up an alternate government with elected representatives and sovereignty reserved for the people, a radical idea for longtime subjects of the Sultan. Then Kemal began rallying the public to fight for independence. But after 4 years of war, deprivation, and death, one old farmer spoke for many with his response.
He said, General, I lost one son in the snows of the Caucasus, and I lost another son in the hell of Arabia, he said. I have nothing to give. He said, he says, I'm not gonna do anything until the enemy comes to that corner of my field.
Mustafa Kemal told them that they would be fighting, most importantly for the future of their own little piece of land, because without that fight, the Greeks, the Armenians, the Brits, the French, the imperialist powers who won the First World War would be conquering their land.
The greed of the World War I victors played into Kemal's hands. British troops occupied Istanbul, while Greece, a one-time Ottoman province, sent its army inland to destroy Ataturk's forces.
That, I guess, was a different moment for all of them to realize that, oh, okay, this is a real occupation. The Western powers are, going to come in, and we are going to be minorities as Turks on our own land. And that really rallied everyone.
Old men and boys assembled rifles and guns by hand, and women carried weapons on their backs, while volunteers trained and the army grew strong. Then they attacked. In 2 decisive battles, Ataturk's troops stopped the Greek advance. But the Greek army's retreat left a trail of death and destruction.
They really followed a scorched earth tactic, and they burned a lot of villages and destroyed crops, and there was this attitude that they didn't want to leave anything behind.
Many ethnic Greeks, Ottoman subjects going back centuries, joined the retreating Greek troops. Angry Turks began to turn on them.
It was really full of savagery. The Greeks were taking revenge, the Turks were taking their own revenge. There was a sense that it was time for payback.
In September 1922, after 3 years of bitter fighting, Ataturk's forces drove the Greek army into the Mediterranean Sea at the city of Izmir. Most of the city burned to the ground. Thousands died. Hundreds of thousands became refugees. In the midst of the chaos and devastation, one thing was clear. The Turkish victory was complete. The invaders left, the borders were secure, and Ataturk was ready to make peace.
Ataturk had rebelled against the entire Allied power and essentially torn up the Sèvres Treaty. He had said, I have now changed the facts on the ground. You do not control Anatolia anymore. We control it. So that treaty is out.
In 1923, a new treaty established the Republic of Turkey. Ataturk then turned his back on 700 years of Imperial Ottoman ambition and warfare and told the world that Turkey would live within its borders.
We must know our limitations and expend our lives only in the cause of our independence.
In many ways, he was an astute diplomat. His motto for world politics was peace at home and peace in the world, so he emphasized stability.
To guarantee the peace he wanted, Ataturk had to diffuse the hatred smoldering between ethnic Greeks who were Christian and their longtime Muslim neighbors. Together, the Turkish and Greek governments came up with a drastic solution: a population exchange. Hundreds of thousands of ethnic Greeks and Turks were forced to leave the only homes they'd ever known.
Greeks of Anatolia, who have been there since time immemorial, had to leave, and it was really a tragedy for them. Yet the alternative was civil war.
The population exchange was the last in a series of enormous war-related upheavals that radically transformed Turkey. By the time Mustafa Kemal established his new government, after 10 years of continual warfare, his country had lost 1/5 of its population from war, ethnic cleansing, starvation, and exile. And what was once a multicultural empire had turned into a republic that was 98% Muslim. Gone were most Greek and Armenian Christians, and with them, much of the educated middle class.
Almost everybody living in Turkey was an illiterate peasant. There were no roads, there were no schools, there were no hospitals, there was no industrial base, no factories, no manufacturing, no exports. There was nothing. Turkey was a shattered, backward country.
Turkey's horrific ordeal turned out to be Ataturk's golden opportunity. The vision, decisiveness, and ambition he'd shown before paled beside what he was about to do next.
At the end of the War of Independence, I think there was a window of opportunity when he could actually do pretty much whatever he wanted to do. And he really took advantage of that.
He had a great sense of timing about what to do and when to do it, how to do it.
I don't think even Ataturk's own supporters understood how radical his project was going to be. What he proceeded to do was essentially to rip Turkish society completely up from its roots and completely reorient it away from the Middle East towards the West, towards Europe.
Through much of Ottoman history, religion and politics had overlapped. The Ottoman Sultan, the political leader, was also the caliph, the spiritual head of most of the Muslim world. In a 1-2 punch, Ataturk abolished both institutions, split off mosque from state, and deprived Islam of its political power.
One of the first laws was to abolish the Sharia part of the Quran. They just sliced the Quran in two practically and said that part, taking 4 wives and cutting the hand when somebody steals, and all the other rules, all of those were abolished and modern laws were brought.
Ataturk was, above all, a secularist. He believed that the power of religion over public life had to be broken before people could progress. And he was bold enough to make this statement, despite the fact that the entire religious establishment, not only in his country, but throughout the entire Islamic world, found this heretical.
To counter Islam, Ataturk held up as a model the practices and ideas of the very people he'd been fighting for 3 years.
He put it as being not so much modern or Western, but being contemporary. The word he uses is being contemporary.
There was no clash of civilizations for Ataturk. There was only one universal civilization, and Turkey needed to catch up.
We lived through pain because we did not understand the conditions of the world. We cannot afford to hesitate anymore. We have to move forward. Civilization is such a fire that it burns and destroys those who ignore it.
Between 1924 and 34, Ataturk closed all religious schools and courts and replaced them with state-run educational and judicial systems. He banned the fez and forced men to wear Western hats. He granted women equal rights and the vote. Because most Turks only went by one name, he ordered everyone to add a last name. And he changed numbering and the alphabet.
Why should I descend to the level of common people? Rather, I should raise them to my level. They should become like me, not I like them.
Ataturk truly loved life. He loved society. He loved the company of beautiful women. He was an immaculate dresser. There was 1,000 pictures of him, but you'll never find a picture of Ataturk in a t-shirt or old clothes. He even had his silk underwear imported from France. He had a fetish about personal cleanliness. He was also a very heavy drinker. That's what ultimately caused his death. He was a person who liked to swim, he liked to dance, he liked to sail yachts. What did all these things have in common? They were the kinds of activities that people did in the West. So even in his own private life, he embraced the ideas of Western culture. I think he very much saw culture and politics as one.
His authoritarian tactics angered many original supporters, but young, educated Turks enthusiastically joined Ataturk's drive to fight what he called the black cloud of ignorance hanging over their nation. Ataturk considered them his new army.
I was one of the first products of the Ataturk revolution, really, of the reforms. We were told that we want to have full, perfect democracy. But you cannot have perfect democracy with the kind of illiteracy we have in Turkey. First, we have to educate ourselves.
My grandmother was one of the teachers where he, traveled from one village to another and teach the new alphabet to the people. And they just very much wanted to learn, and they very much cherished this new changes coming to their lives.
Experts claimed the language change would take 6 years. Ataturk ordered it finished in 6 months.
During the first year the new language was introduced, there was a grand total of 1 book published in Turkey, because it was forbidden to publish in the old script, but nobody knew the new one yet. So there was a complete stop. What else does this mean? Thanks to Ataturk, the entire heritage of written Turkish essentially disappeared. This is a huge price to pay. It cuts Turks off from their entire cultural heritage, or a large part of it.
But it served the purpose. The reform itself served the purpose of initiating and carrying out this clean break with the Ottoman past.
Without Islam or empire to hold his new nation together, Ataturk needed something else. He found it, being Turkish. But he gave Turk a new meaning. Under the Ottomans, it meant ignorant peasant. By the time of the Young Turk movement, the word stood for a proud ethnic identity.
When Ataturk decided to come up with a national identity for Anatolia, and he used the term Turk and Turkish not in a purely ethnic sense. He wanted everyone to become Turkish. The Kurds, Albanians, Bosnians, Circassians, all people would be assimilated into this civic identity of Turkishness.
And that was why Ataturk came up with this slogan, "Happy is he who can call himself a Turk."
Let's have me as an example. My grandmother comes from Bosnia. My grandfather comes from Salonika. My dad's side comes from Caucasus. So this is, a very traditional Turkish family. And we come with different ethnicities. We come with different cultures, but we all name ourselves as Turk. As long as you're loyal to the Turkish Republic, as long as you are a citizen to the Republic of Turkey, you are a Turk.
But one ethnic group refused to go along: the Kurds. If the Greek invasion had threatened Turkish independence from without, Kurdish rebels threatened the new Turkish state from within.
All other Muslim minorities coming from the Balkans, the Caucasus, they owed their existence to the Ottoman Empire, and they were fine with the idea of becoming Turkish. Whereas the Kurds were indigenous people, they were a majority in their land, they spoke their own language, and they were not ready to be assimilated.
In 1925, just 2 years after the Republic of Turkey was established, there was a big revolt led by Sheikh Said, who was a Kurdish clan leader in the southeast. Ataturk began to realize that ethnic nationalism could be combined with religious reaction and undermine his project for the modernization of Turkey.
Ataturk soon became a target himself. A handful of disgruntled nationalists tried to kill him. His response to their plot and to the Kurds was swift and harsh. special military tribunals arrested thousands and executed hundreds. The only opposition party was disbanded, and criticizing Ataturk and the state became illegal. The Kurdish language was banned, and Kurds were publicly renamed Mountain Turks. Most opposition collapsed, but Kurdish rebellions continued.
Every cultural revolution creates a counter-revolution. There were people who wanted to re-establish the caliphate. There were Kurds who wanted to establish their independence again. And these military tribunals, these security measures were used to repress such resistance to the idea of a secular nation state. In a way, it was the price to pay for the Cultural Revolution.
Ataturk was a dictator. There's no doubt about it. He could not have accomplished what he did in a democratic framework. Nonetheless, even during Ataturk's own lifetime and his own presidency, his role changed quite a bit. By the end of his rule in the 1930s, he was actually quite removed from the power structure. And more and more, Ataturk was marginalized. As they marginalized him, they praised him higher and higher. They would build 10 new statues to him, and then they would reduce his power a little more. So he was able to fade away in a huge halo of adulation.
The praise spread far beyond Turkey's borders. The West welcomed Turkey's stability and its lack of territorial ambition. Among other heads of state, Great Britain's Edward VIII paid a visit. The Greek Prime Minister, who'd earlier gone to war against Ataturk, nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. On November 10, 1938, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk died. He was 58 years old. When he'd first become president, there was 10% literacy, and his new nation could not even manufacture matches. By the time he died 15 years later, literacy had doubled. Industries produced everything from textiles to cement, and Turkey was exporting crops to Europe. And its government was moving toward democracy, a process that would continue in fits and starts in the years to come.
Today, Turkey is a national state. It's pretty much secular, as secular as it gets in the Islamic world. Turks are very nationalistic. They love their country, they love their state, and they love Ataturk. Yet, in many ways, Turkey is coming to terms with some of the excessive parts of the Cultural Revolution, the legacy of Ataturk.
By the early 21st century, Turkey had relaxed some restrictions on Islam and on the Kurds. Its Western tilt continued, ranging from NATO membership to the possibility of joining the European Union.
For many decades, everybody in Turkey embraced the Ataturk ideal, but they had to. Only now, the lid is coming off in Turkey. And Turkey is now, just within the last couple of years, becoming a hugely free country, much freer than it ever has been in the past. One of the things we're about to find out is how deeply the ordinary Turk truly embraced these reforms, or was it something that they just did for 2 or 3 generations because they felt they had to?
I think Ataturk's reforms are very deep, but democracy is not an easy thing to accomplish. You have to evolve in it. It has to settle in, and it takes time. It's a difficult thing to change a society because you're not only changing things on paper, but you're also changing a state of mind. I just feel so grateful that he did it.